Welcome to our documentary, The Art of Enlightenment and Its Impact on Architecture. Hello, my name is Devesh.
And I am Seth. Together, we will take you on a journey to one of the history's most transformative periods, the Enlightenment. We will explore how its ideals shaped the world of architecture.
Enlightenment wasn't just about philosophy and science, it was a revolution in creativity and design. Its principle of reason, progress, and aesthetics redefined the built environment. From monumental building to urban planning, this monument influenced architecture in ways that still resonate today. So let's dive in. The Enlightenment emphasized reason and knowledge. Scholars like Jurgen Habermas and Gordon Outram explored how these ideas translated into architecture. Take Marc Antonio Leguer, for example, in this essay through architecture from 1753, he called for a return to simplicity, structures inspired by nature, no more excessive ornamentation, just regional design. Architecture of this era was embraced classical antiquity. Antony Widler's emphasis on the writing of the walls explain how symmetry, proportion, and mathematical precision became hallmarks of Neolithic style. These designs were just beautiful. They symbolize democracy, rationality, and progress, reflecting the Enlightenment's core values. Science and technology played a crucial role in shaping Enlightenment architecture. Engineers and architects began integrating new principles into their designs. James Ackerman highlighted how materials like iron and glass revolutionized construction. Think of the early industrial building, functional yet innovative. Urban planning also involved Spiro Kostev in the city shaped explained how grid-based city plans and public spaces reflected the Enlightenment ideas of order and harmony. Cities became more than places to live, they became symbol of progress designed to encourage civic engagement. The Enlightenment wasn't just about reason, it also explored beauty. Edmund Burke's ideas on the sublime and Immanuel Kant's theories on aesthetics influenced architectural expression. Buildings like theaters and museums were just functional. They were designed to inspire. These spaces aimed to educate and uplift the people. Nicholas Purcell, in A History of Building Types, explained how schools, hospitals, and scientific academics reflected Enlightenment ideas. These designs prioritize functionality and the dimension of knowledge.
Talk about its critiques and counterpoints. While the Enlightenment brought many advancements, it wasn't without any criticism. Michael Foucault, in his Disciplined and Punished, explored how principles of order and surveillance influenced institutional architecture. Michael's exploration of prisons, hospitals, and schools as institutions designed to shape and control the human mind is a very powerful critique. He argued that these institutions were not just places for rehab or education, but were built on principles of discipline and order that were reflective of the Enlightenment rationality. Examples like Panopticon are design created by the philosopher and social theorist Jeremy Bentham is one of the most iconic examples. The idea behind the Panopticon was to create a space where prisoners would always feel watched even if they weren't. This concept reflects the kind of surveillance that relies on reason in order to maintain control. Postmodern critics like Charles Jenks also challenged the universality of Enlightenment ideas. He argued that they sometimes ignored local traditions, favoring a homogenized aesthetics. Now let's talk about the legacy of Enlightenment architecture. Despite its critiques, Enlightenment's influence endures. It emphasizes on reason, functionality, and beauty that continues to inspire architecture even if we talk about today. Now let's jump into neoclassical art. From the classical Greeks and Romans, neoclassical artists believed art could civilize, reform, and transform society, with the moralizing message as a reflection of the Enlightenment that was going on in the political and social areas at the time. All those frilly and curly decorations of the Rococo style, ancient Greek and Roman architecture and sculpture was much simpler and much more beautiful. I would say that there is but one way for the moderns to become great, and perhaps unequaled. I mean by imitating the ancient, especially the Greek artists. Art must have moral purpose. The artist must be a philosopher and have no other guide except the torch of reason. A painter should be a man of order. The function of art is to make virtue. So the neoclassicism as a style actually begins in Rome, with German writers and artists living there, trying to bring noble simplicity and calm grandeur into their work by imitating the ancients. They then influenced a whole bunch of other artists, especially in France. Its Enlightenment philosophers were arguing for a society based upon reasons like in ancient Greece, and for a new civil order based on natural law, and for science based on experiments and observation. They weren't particularly revolutionaries, and many of them were nobility, but their ideas were important in undermining the legitimacy of the old regime and shaping the French Revolution. Fascinating. It is really fascinating. Did you know that there were actually a kind of hierarchy of the kinds of images people wanted out, and that this order influenced the value of the works for patrons and characters? So, top of the list was scenes from the Bible, classical mythology, and history, and then came portraits and so-called genre paintings of everyday life, and finally landscapes and still lifes. So if you couldn't afford a heroic scene from ancient history, you couldn't do better than a plate of fruit, healthy as well. Definitely French neoclassical painting was all about strong lines and beautifully lit classical setting with scenes from history or mythology. The two French painters who became the biggest names of this period were Poussin and Claude. They are really worth checking out. And then a painter called David came along. He actually visited the ruins of Herculaneum and said the experience was like having a cataract surgically removed. He became a symbol of the French Revolution in 1789 that overthrew the monarchy and changed absolutely everything. A lot of grand buildings we see from the period with Roman and Greek columns were also inspired by this discovery of ancient civilizations, and I suppose the need for a new architecture to express Enlightenment thinking. This is really important. The discovery of Herculaneum revealed that those ancient Romans had some pretty good ideas about how to design a city. Their houses and public buildings were laid out on a squared grid design with the central forum for city services, just like New York. So grand buildings with columns sprung up in cities, and a whole new French approach developed during the reign of Napoleon, known as the Empire style. It was all tied up with a strong sense of national identity. So many of our cities as we know them today really owe a lot of neoclassicism very much. So it's never really gone away after all the horrible wars of the 20th century. Classicism re-emerged, and we know it may make a comeback after all the crazy art of the last decades.
Welcome back, listeners, to our quick Q&A session. Let's dive right in and see what questions we have got. What is the Enlightenment period? The Enlightenment was a time in the 17th and 18th century when people focused on using reasons and science to understand the world. The question old ideas about religion and government. How did the Enlightenment influence art? Artists during the Enlightenment focused on clear, simple, and balanced design. They used art to show ideas of reason, order, and logic. Instead of the emotional style of earlier art, what kind of architecture appeared during the Enlightenment? Neolithical classical architecture became popular. This style used designs from ancient Greece and Rome, such as columns and balance shape, to show the importance of reason and order. What are the main characteristics of neoclassical architecture? Neoclassical buildings have symmetrical shapes, columns, triangular roofs called pediments, and use simple materials like stone and marble. How were some famous architects of the Enlightenment? Famous architects include Jacques Germain Soufflot, Robert Adam, Joseph Jefferman, and Artemon Louis Boulogne. They helped create many important public buildings during this time. What role did architecture play during the Enlightenment? Architecture was used to show ideas of reason and public service. Many buildings like museums, libraries, and government structures were designed to serve the people and present new ideas of democracy and knowledge. How did Enlightenment ideas affect city planning? Cities were planned with organized street layouts, wide roads, and public squares to encourage people to gather, think, and talk together. The design was meant to be orderly and practical. What is the significance of the Pantheon in Paris? The Pantheon is an important neoclassical building. It was originally built as a church but became a place to honor great French citizens, reflecting ideas of treason and for respect.
How did the Enlightenment architecture show democratic values? Neoclassical buildings like government offices and public spaces were made to be accessible to everyone. These buildings represented ideas of equality, reason, and public service. How was Enlightenment art different from Baroque art? Baroque art was detailed, emotional, and dramatic, while Enlightenment art was simpler, more focused on clear ideas, reason, and the beauty of nature and classical themes. How did the Enlightenment lead to the creation of public museums? Enlightenment thinkers believed in sharing knowledge. Public museums were created to give everyone access to art, history, and science, helping people learn and think for themselves. How did art in public places reflect Enlightenment ideas? Art in public buildings like libraries and government offices often showed themes of knowledge, reason, and progress. Sculptures and paintings were used to remind people of important values like virtue and civic duty. How did artists and architecture shows Enlightenment ideas in their work? Artists and architects use clear, organized design and classical style to express ideas of reason, order, and human progress. Their work often focused on themes of knowledge, education, and virtue. What impact did Enlightenment architecture have on modern design? The neoclassical style influenced modern buildings. Today, many government buildings, museums, and libraries use elements like columns, domes, and so, as we come to the end of this journey into the art of enlightenment and its impact on architecture, let's reflect on how this extraordinary era forever changed the way we think about design, culture, and the spaces we inhabit. The Enlightenment wasn't just about grand ideas, it was about putting those ideas into action, shaping a world that sought balance, reason, and progress. From symmetrical facades inspired by reason to grand public spaces designed to foster community. The architecture of the Enlightenment continues to speak to us. It reminds us of the power of human creativity and our shared pursuit of beauty and functionality. Thank you for joining us on today on this journey. We hope it's inspired you to see the world around you in a new light. Architecture is more than just walls and roofs. It's a reflection of who we are and what we value. Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and remember the buildings around you just aren't just spaces, they are stories just waiting to be discovered.